eventually others got their money from the two other banks. But this was became the dispute between Iceland and the UK and Netherlands. But together about $6 billion that was arranged as a political solution as what Iceland should pay instead of paying the whole thing. That would be about 2 times that. And but this is anyway very unfair and probably impossible for the Icelandic people because these were private banks, and so the common Icelanders would say it had nothing to do with that. The thing is that they were nationalized in the end, and so the debts and liabilities of these banks, they came into the heads of the common Icelanders. Of course, there was a huge responsibility for all the politicians, the government at that time, but it was amazing, the denial and the irresponsibility and how naive these politicians were actually, and the bankers, central bank, and surveillance, and no one resigned, not one person. And that was what outraged, really, the population. I mean, some people didn't even care about there was a crisis. The main thing is that no one was taking political accountability. That was just too much for people. And so eventually they start to protest very heavily. And in few months, it was always getting more intensified. And eventually, in January, actually it was the date of 6th of October is like the starting date for the crisis in Iceland in 2008. But it was not until in January when the protests kept so intense that the Social Democrats who were in government in the coalition with the Independence Party, they kind of broke down, or they couldn't face their nation anymore with the protests getting violent. So they ended this government, and they decided that we should have an election. And as a result, we got after the election, we had some shift in the power structure that only though resulted in left-wing government. So everybody was quite happy with it. Later, very disappointed. And this government is, of course, no better than the former. Now it's being mainly the Social Democrats ruling, and they just want to join the European Union, seeing it as a magic solution for all our problems. And but of course, that's a very simplified and naive view, like we know with the Social Democrats, especially here in Iceland, that they seem very blocked and naive towards the International Monetary Fund. They really think that they are here to try to help us, and we just have to face their conditions and policies. But this is, of course, really no exception from other stories of the IMF, and now we really need to get rid of it. I think people are realizing here in Iceland more than ever before how these institutions really work, and people are starting more to demand that the IMF should be kicked out of the country, and also the population is against joining the European Union, even if this coalition had decided to apply for membership and see how would it go, the negotiations, if it will be good for Iceland to join, and that will be decided in a referendum here in Iceland. But still, the population in Iceland is even more opposed here after how the EU has treated us in a very bad way.
Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is now our second hour broadcasting here from Reykjavik, Iceland, ground zero, the front line in the fight between Icelandic national survival and the financier-motivated diktat of Gordon Brown, Balkenende, the European Union with Barroso, oh my God, and the International Monetary Fund of the infamous Dominique Strauss-Kahn, that French financier who specializes in destroying independent nations. We're right in the thick of things here. A lot of things going on this Friday, the 2nd of October, as we tape in Reykjavik. Ireland, a little bit to our east, is in the process of voting whether they accept this monstrous Lisbon Treaty, what they call the streamlining of European decision-making. Well, we know, thanks to Marie-France Garot, back in June of 2005, before the French rejected a similar European constitution that time, she said, this constitution, this Lisbon Treaty today, in effect, guarantees nothing but the oligarchical domination of European institutions. It will institutionalize elitism, oligarchism, make sure that bankers will forever be supreme over workers and normal people. So we're hoping that the Irish pull themselves together and vote no a second time. Because, again, just like the U.S. House of Representatives had to vote twice to get the bailout through, Ireland is being forced to vote twice. Hopefully they will say no and no again. The other election that we want to point to is the German election, which took place now a few days ago on Sunday, September 27th. The German election has shown a very interesting pattern. All the large parties have lost votes. The big losers, the Social Democrats, the SPD, the German Social Democratic Party, had the worst result probably in 100 years. They're down to 22 or 23% of the vote. They're not a people's party anymore. They're not even a workers' party. That would have been better. But they're now practically a sect. They're collapsing so fast. What it shows, and this is an important lesson for the Social Democrats here in Iceland, if you're a Social Democratic Party with an important trade union component, you cannot be the servant and the toady and the lackey of bankers, financiers, hedge fund hyenas, and the rest of this congeries and zoo. You've got to defend economic populism. You've got to defend working people and working families. And if those Social Democrats in Germany don't quit, they're going to be in bad shape. Now, this is a long-term trend. Remember, the French Socialist Party under Lionel Jospin collapsed at the beginning of this decade. You'll remember when Jospin ran against Chirac. He didn't even make it into the second round. Le Pen turned out to be the main opposition for Jospin. That's how Chirac got his term in office. And now, of course, we've got Sarkozy, Narkozy. But the tendency of the Social Democratic Party is to collapse. Is now the French socialists collapsed some years back. The German Social Democrats are now collapsing. And as soon as we have an election in Great Britain, this awful new Labour of Tony Blair and the infamous Gordon Brown is also going to collapse to a small fraction of what it is today. Here in Iceland, we've got a government with the Social Democrats and the Left Green Party. The Left Greens should also look at Germany. There we have what I would call the warmonger Greens, the party of that awful Joschka Fischer, who was a supporter of the Iraq War. He was a Green. He was a hooligan in the Frankfurt scene 20 years ago, and then he became the pro-Bush, pro-warmonger foreign minister of Germany. Those Greens they've gotten a few extra percent, but they've now fallen behind the other party, the so-called left party. Die Linke gained 3 or 4% in the German election, and this is important because of two things. The Die Linke is anti-Afghan war and anti-European Union Lisbon Treaty. They're against the Lisbon Treaty, and they have done rather well. They have passed the warmonger Greens in the German party system. The CSU of Bavaria lost heavily, and that means that the CDU-CSU, the so-called National Christian Democratic Bloc in Germany, actually lost 1.5% of their votes, too. So the Social Democrats lost 11%, the CDU-CSU lost 1.5%, a lot of losses concentrated in the CSU, whereas the Liberal Party, unfortunately, the free market demagogue party, have gotten about 15%. They will now form a coalition with the CDU-CSU, which is going to have a relatively thin parliamentary majority. Who knows what's going to happen with that under depression, crisis, and breakdown conditions. These liberals are then followed by the left party, Die Linke, and finally the smallest of the factions in the Bundestag is going to be the warmonger Greens, who have been punished for their warmongering. So the parties here in Iceland ought to look at that. And again, everybody's waiting for that British election. Gordon Brown has been speaking in the last week at the yearly conference of the Labour Party. He's pretending that he has a chance to continue in government, but he does not. So here in Iceland, again, it's the